We're picking up where we left off yesterday. The speaker is Prisca, and she is in the forum in Corinth, where Paul is expected to be arraigned before Gallio, the governor, brother of Seneca. At this point, someone has just been called. The instant he rose, my heart raced. I hadn't seen Paul in 2 days. What had they done to him? But again, it wasn't Paul. It was a stranger's name. 2 Corinthians appeared to argue over a piece of property. As they mounted the platform, one said loudly, as much to the judge as to the other, "I summon you to justice." He said, "In jus te voco," to place himself and his cause under official authority. He'd brought a lump of earth as a symbol for the land he said he owned. Gallio uttered formal words. The men began to state claims and counterclaims. Money was pledged on both sides, security against the final verdict. I wasn't listening. I was shifting my weight from foot to foot. I was looking around for Aquila, for Timothy or Titius or anyone whose familiar face might comfort me. Jesus, keep him safe. Jesus, keep us all. Hide behind the bema. Passing among the pillars of the south portico, I thought I saw the form of a woman, Phoebe. But then the scribe stood up and called out in Latin, "Let Sosthenes approach on behalf of the synagogue of the Jews." Sosthenes? My ears filled with a rushing sound, a waterfall sound, the roaring of my own blood. From the room at the right of the bema, 5 men stepped out into sunlight. There he was, Paul. Paul was in the midst of them, his wrists in ropes. They walked toward the platform, where they were all joined by 6 more men. So these had been waiting in the crowd around me. How could I have missed them? All 10 were members of the synagogue, and I knew them. I recognized their faces, grim, solemn men. Oh, save him, save your servant Paul. Was it my anxiety that made him look so pale? Was he always so pale? That black eyebrow gave his head a moon-white pallor. His eyes were redder than usual, irritated. His neck was thin. I could see the cords and the vessels in the neck. He was wearing nothing but a tunic, like a slave on an errand. He didn't turn and look at the people. He didn't see me. I wished he would speak so I could hear his voice. I knew Paul best by his voice. 9 of the men on the platform formed a semicircle, their backs to the railing. The 10th man stepped center, a papyrus rolled up in his left hand. He was facing away from me, but I knew him. I knew Sosthenes by his hair. I hated that hair. Tight knots and furious curls. Sosthenes, the head of the synagogue, raised the papyrus like a wave offering toward the bema, the chair, and the judge in the chair. He bowed and began to unroll it, at the same time announcing in Greek, "By Gallio's permission and begging his indulgence, we will read and present a complaint." But Gallio raised a languid hand. He coughed. In Latin, he said, "Why is that man bound?" The interruption confused Sosthenes, or perhaps the question did. He glanced at Paul, who returned the look unblinking. "Well, he, that is, Paul," Sosthenes began, still speaking in Greek, "this same fellow, Paul of Tarsus." "Solve ium," Gallio said. Sosthenes stumbled into silence. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said. "What did you say?" Gallio smiled. In Greek, he said, "Unbind the man you've brought before me." He spoke in a manner most urbane, as if he were cajoling kindness from a child. Sosthenes squared his shoulders. "No, but the law allows it." He tapped his temple, quoting, "If the adversary resists, so states your law, your own law, proconsul. If the adversary resists, the plaintiff can use force, but always in the presence of witnesses. Look, we have 10 witnesses." Gallio raised a slender finger and switched it left and right. "Unless that charge regards some vicious crime," he said, "there is no need to keep him bound." "But it does," Sosthenes replied immediately. "The charge specifies a savage bodily—" "Cut him loose, Jews." A rough voice behind me shouted, "Cut him loose!" People began to laugh, though there was no humor in it. They moved closer to the platform. The sour-smelling Apelles was pressed against me. My mouth was dry. I kept trying to swallow. "Cut him loose." Sosthenes turned and shot quick, nervous looks at the crowd. My Paul, stood silently by, gazing at Sosthenes with curiosity. No, with something more than that, with an intense interest. He was watching no one else, nothing else but Sosthenes. Suddenly, that head of the synagogue drew himself up to his full height and faced the proconsul above him on the bema. "Sir," he said, "if you will allow me to read the accusation and to adduce the charges and the testimony of even a single witness, you will hear how vicious are the crimes that have been done in this man's name." He raised the papyrus to read it. Again, Gallio interrupted, smiling. "My friend," he said, leaning forward and beckoning Sosthenes to step nearer, and nearer still. Blinking, walking stiffly, Sosthenes obeyed. "My friend, I want to save you from further embarrassment." The proconsul's tone was intimate, implying that this present matter involved no more than the two of them. But we could hear him. Everyone could hear him. The crowd grew hushed in order to listen, and silence fell upon the forum. The silence scared me. My mouth kept trying to swallow. I looked toward my Paul in his thin tunic bound by the wrists with ropes, pale and perfectly calm, watching Sosthenes. Gallio said, "If your charge concerns an altercation which you experienced the day before yesterday on the Cenchrean Road, a physical altercation in which you received a blow to your own person, I suggest you withdraw the charge or else revise it." That was me. My face flamed at the public recognition that altercation concerned me. How many people were staring at Prisca now? Sosthenes cried, "Why?" He stamped his foot and cried, "Why are you persecuting me? Why should we withdraw the charge?" Lowly, the crowd began to growl. Gallio paused and coughed. "Because you, Sosthenes," he said with a cold articulation, "were the aggressor. You, sir, initiated the altercation." I? Sosthenes choked. He shook the papyrus like a stick at the judge and cried, "I initiated nothing." Careful, the proconsul said. "Say nothing more till you've met every witness to this unfortunate event." He rose and turned to the door behind him. "Vene, hoc," he called. "Come hither." The language invited one person only. Yet two came through the door. The first was a Nubian, the Nubian, in fact. I went up on my toes with gladness. Here was the marvelous black man that caught me when I thought I was going to be beaten. Marcus, his name is Marcus. And immediately behind him, moving without a tread, smoothly floating toward Gallio on the platform, came Phoebe, my radiance from Cenchreae. The courtly Roman took her hand and led her forward with a dignified stride. Oh, Paul, this is the woman that I want you to meet. You will love her as much as I do. Suddenly the day was going well, going very well indeed. Gallio looked down on Sosthenes. So did Phoebe look down. But at me. I think she was looking at me. I beamed back. I beamed right back at her. Never again, sir, accuse me of persecutions. Gallio curled his lip with patrician contempt. Accuse me instead of truth. This particular witness brings a disinterested testimony. You see, nothing to gain, nothing to lose, and she is of the highest repute. You would be a pretty fool to contradict her. Now then, Sosthenes of the Jewish synagogue, Gallio said, stepping backward and giving his voice the ring of a rhetorician. If your accusation regards no vicious crime, you will immediately unbind this fellow, as you call him, Paul from Tarsus, and let him stand freely on his own. Sosthenes wiped his mouth. He glanced at Paul. He twisted round to the men behind him, seeking some word, some counsel, I think. There was a wild bewilderment in his eyes, and in that instant, I did not hate him. None of his company responded. They shuffled and stared at their feet. Only Paul continued to gaze at the poor man with an unwavering attention. Cut him loose, Jew. The yell in my ear, the yell made me jump. Apelles, the shoemaker, screamed, Noxious Jew, roach, cut him loose. Someone else cried, loose. Others chanted, loose, loose. Sosthenes acted. He crushed the papyrus and threw it down and pointed toward the bema, shouting, we too have laws. There was a stubborn conviction in him. The man was unclosing his soul. Ours are the laws of life and death, laws greater than your human codes, because these are the laws of heaven. Cut him loose, poltroon. Cut him loose, you groveling Jew. Scorn and laughter, catcalls, hooting, whistling filled the forum like the crackle and flashings of a coming storm. At the top of his lungs, Sosthenes roared, this man is persuading others to worship God contrary to the laws of heaven. Gallio gathered the folds of his toga close to his body. I could hear his words. I read his lips. He said, since this is a matter of your own law, see to it yourselves. He swept the toiling multitude with an impassive glance. Then, taking Phoebe's hand, he led her to the back wall and out the door. Soldiers, secretaries, the cringing scribe, all followed. Cut him loose.